every time a bilingual uses language, they also use this executive control system. And therein lies the key to all of the results I'm going to show you from now on. All right, so the first component is inhibition and selective attention. Okay, you walk into a room and you see that. What do you look at? How do you see anything at all? You're bombarded. You need a system to focus attention, and that's one of the jobs of the executive control system. Now, in the laboratory, the way we have all these tasks that we think are kind of cute, that measure what we think are inhibition and executive control, and many people think that the gold standard task for measuring executive control and inhibition is the Stroop task. Now, you're going to do it now. You may think you know what it is, but even if you do, I don't think you know what it feels like, so you're all going to actually do this. And here's what you're going to do. I'm going to show you words, and then you name the color of the ink. And you really have to. You have to say it out loud as quickly as you can, and you have to be loud. Come on, okay? It'll wake you up. Okay, you ready?
Red, blue, green, green.
And you're all bilingual, right? It's really hard. But that's the whole point. You've got two things you can be looking at, and you really need help focusing on the right cue, all right? So you can take the difference between the easy ones that I showed you first and the hard ones that I showed you second, and the difference in reaction time for those two kinds of items is called the Stroop effect, all right? And the Stroop effect is how much extra attention you need to give the right answer. It's all about executive control and inhibition. We did 2 studies, 96 people in each study. We have all sorts of control conditions. I'll just put both studies up right away. What I'm plotting here is the Stroop effect, how much extra time subjects needed on the hard incongruent trials. Red is always monolingual in my slides, and blue is always bilingual. And in this slide, the hashed ones are older adults, and these are younger adults. And what you see is in these 2 studies, we have a perfect replication. For both younger and older adults, it takes longer for monolinguals to deal with that conflict. That's the quintessential executive control task. Now, the next component is multitasking and shifting. Like him. Now, this comes up a lot in life. Increasingly, we try to do several things at one time. Students are very good at this. I mean, if you think how many electronic devices students can simultaneously manage, it's quite astounding. But all of us actually, I should have removed that slide, sorry. But all of us actually spend a certain amount of time multitasking. This is my favorite one, I have to say. There's one kind of multitasking that I predict a lot of us are guilty of trying, and it's really a terrible thing. Do not try this at home, but I think we all do this. And it's that, right? It's really naughty. It's really naughty. This is driving while talking on a cell phone. Now, this is an old slide, and you'll notice she's actually holding a handheld phone, which is now illegal. But it's not illegal to drive if you're talking on a hands-free phone. So we did an experiment. This is a graduate student, Jason Tellner, who did an experiment simulating what it's like to drive while talking on a hands-free device, okay? He has a driving simulator, so you go through this course just driving, and you get scores for how safe your driving is. You're watching on a monitor, and events come up on the screen, and you have to brake or turn or pass and so on. So we get scores for each person on how safe their driving is under those conditions. And then we also gave them a set of verbal tasks that they solved through headphones. So they're just sitting at a computer, wearing headphones, and they have a number of verbal tasks like repeat sentences, define words, very simple conversational type verbal tasks. 35 monolinguals, 41 bilinguals, and when they do these tasks, they perform identically. Okay. Then we put them back in the driving simulator and put the headphones on and make them do them at the same time. This is what driving with a cell phone is, right? You're doing both at the same time. So what we're looking at is how much worse their driving is. Make no mistake, everybody's driving is worse. It's really astounding. What we're looking at is how much worse it is, okay? And here are the results. Again, red is monolinguals. Now this, what I'm plotting here is how much worse it is, percent decline. So whatever score you got for driving when you just did driving, what percent worse is your driving score when you're driving and talking on your, and doing these verbal tasks. And for each of the 4 kinds of verbal tasks, there was a large significant difference where the monolinguals suffered a much greater decline in safe driving. That's multitasking. I will make no policy statements about it. These are just data. And the third component that is really very central to the executive function is working memory. It's what you do when you have to hold information in mind, calculate, reorder, reframe information, holding stuff in mind and manipulating it. I'm going to show you a task that a former graduate student of mine, Xia Feng, developed. And she developed a children's version and an adult's version. I'm just going to do this very quickly. It's a nonverbal working memory task where she manipulated how much manipulation was required. So we could compare groups on these different conditions. I'm only going to show you the data from the most difficult condition where there's a lot of executive control, a lot of reordering and manipulation required. Okay, here's the children's task. Children are told that they're going to see, I'll just show you the display, they see these one at a time. They see 9 by 9 matrix. They're told that each square is a pond, and there's some frogs jumping through these ponds, and they see this for a second, it goes off, then they see this, and so on. And after they've seen all of the matrices, they have a blank, and it's a touchscreen computer. They have to point to all of the ponds where they had seen frogs, but they have to do it in a particular order. You see these little bars, that's the path. So you have to walk along the path that connects the ponds, and every time you get to a pond where there was a frog, you have to press it in that order. So the correct answer is up there, okay? It's hard, it's really hard, because you have to remember the ponds and then reorder them. Then the adult version, it's a slightly larger matrix, there's no frogs, you just have to remember boring square, red squares, but it's the same deal, okay? All right, so we're looking at the scores they get on this difficult condition. We have data from 7-year-old children and young adults. On the simple conditions, where they just have to remember in any order, for example, which segments had been indicated, everybody's exactly the same. The working memory component is to not only remember which squares had been indicated, but to manipulate the order in which you have to indicate them. Excuse me. So for children and adults, the scores they achieve in correctly reordering, remembering and reordering that information is higher by the bilinguals. That's working memory. All right, so to sum up that very rapid romp through executive control, the argument is that because language selection and language processing in bilinguals is effortful, because of joint activation of the two languages, the executive control system is recruited. And because that executive control system is then used intensely across a long period of time, it increases in its efficiency. So practice enhances the functioning of that executive control system. These effects are not confined to just one of those components that I showed you. We have evidence for all three major components. The argument used to be 10 years ago, most researchers were saying that if there's an executive control advantage, it will be an inhibition, because what you have to do, think back to that cartoon character of the two languages that are active, what you have to do is just inhibit the language you're not speaking. So it's just about inhibition. That's where we started in thinking about these problems. That turns out not to be true, because every component of executive control has been shown to be involved in language processing in bilinguals and enhanced through that experience. And these are lifelong effects. I've already shown you bits of data with children and older adults. Oh, what is this slide? Okay, here we go. Here's the lifelong effect. So I showed you earlier that that selection leads to reduced lexical retrieval, but it simultaneously leads to enhanced executive control. So from this configuration come these two rather different outcomes. Now, the dichotomy I just showed you between sort of worse lexical retrieval and better executive control is a bit of a pretense, because there isn't in real life a clear distinction between what we do cognitively that we consider to be a lexical problem or a verbal problem, and what we do that we would consider to be a pure nonverbal executive control problem. The reality is that these are highly integrated. We use our nonverbal system in close integration with our verbal system. These are highly integrated. So I'm going to show you two studies, two kinds of situations where we can look at the interaction of this dichotomy, where there's a kind of a reduction in verbal processing with an enhancement of nonverbal processing, and how they come together in real tasks. The first one is verbal fluency. And you may have noticed that verbal fluency was listed on one of the early slides as one of the things bilinguals typically do worse. Okay. Now, verbal fluency is a very standard neuropsychological measure. It's used to diagnose brain function. If you smash your head, if you get body checked in a hockey game and you're thrown against the boards, you fall off your motorcycle and you smash your head and you end up in emergency, somebody will give you a verbal fluency test. And it looks like a completely silly, simple test, but it's actually very sensitive to specific kinds of brain function. There's two components. The first is called category fluency or semantic fluency. You have 60 seconds in which to name all of the animals you can think of, or name all the flowers you can think of. You have to generate words that correspond to a particular semantic category. Now, we know that semantic information is represented in the medial temporal lobe, that things that belong or share category membership should co-activate each other. Once you're sort of in the animal space in your semantic network, it should be easy to retrieve lots more animals, and so on. So the task is well supported